Hello and welcome to episode 2 of the HorrorHouse podcast. I am your sole host for today, Morgan Robinson. Sadly, our co-host, the delightful Daisy, couldn't join us today, but hopefully that's okay. She should be back for episode 3. Today we're gonna discuss if modern horror directors will go down in history, because there are of course a lot of legendary horror directors out there, and we're just going to talk about if the modern guys can live up to their predecessors' high standards. If you want to get a clearer idea of what this podcast is going to be focused on in the future, because we are of course still in a almost experimental phase. We've just started it, obviously, so we're still sort of trying to figure out every little detail, but you can go to thepurpledom.com. There is a post up there about what to expect from HorrorHouse in the future. Hopefully, if you've not got a clear idea, that should clear any questions up. But yeah, today we're going to be talking about these modern horror directors. But first, I thought I'd talk about what makes a legendary horror director, because to me, you need a mix of consistency in quality. You need to have created a new thing in the genre, sort of or take a new spin on something. And you know, the guys always come to mind first: John Carpenter, Wes Craven, George Romero, people like that, because they did transform the genre in their way. So yeah, I mean, they are just 3, obviously. There's many more. They are just 3 major horror directing legends. Of course, John Carpenter with Halloween, The Fog, The Thing, you know, in that 6-year period with them coming out, he was the face of the genre, really, wasn't he? It was just, there was no one who could match him in terms of directing. And I talk about consistency. You know, there is consistency. They are 3 of the most well-regarded horrors of their era. And of course, Wes Craven had even more of an impressive resume, really, right from his debut, Last House on the Left, which is, to me, it's not an easy film to watch because of its nature, but you know, it's damn effective. Of course, he did Nightmare on Elm Street, Hills Have Eyes, even, you know, the Scream films, even Swamp Thing, the most ridiculous DC Comics character. Swamp Thing, 1982, which is a bizarre film, but if you're in a bit of a silly mood, it's well worth the watch. Yeah, I mean, when it comes to the modern guys, there are definitely people you'd class as horror directors. I mean, maybe they've gone off and done different things. You know, you think of James Wan. Of course, he found his footing in the horror genre, but he's done, you know, he did Fast and Furious 7, which it couldn't be further from a horror film, and he's of course going on to do the Aquaman film for DC, which he has said will incorporate sea monsters, so maybe he's putting a horror spin on that. But of course, you know, he did Saw. We talked about Saw in episode 1. Don't know if you've checked that out, but you'll be able to on YouTube or wherever we talked about Saw and the impact that had on the genre, especially in the 21st century, when I think it was me who said that it's really the only major horror franchise we've got in this century. And James Wan is who we have to thank for that. He, of course, did The Conjuring as well, and its sequel coming out in a couple of weeks, actually. It might be only a week at the time of this recording. Maybe a couple of weeks. I'm not sure. But yeah, he also, of course, did Insidious, which the first one was, I think Daisy mentioned in the first episode that Insidious was quite sort of strange for her, because the first half was great but the second half was weird. I quite like it, to be honest. It's not with horror these days, nothing's perfect, really. Not like it was decades ago anyway. But Insidious was fine, and of course James Wan has that style. That's what is really important in creating a legendary horror director, I think, to be sort of an auteur and have that individual style. I think certainly The Conjuring and Insidious have that, you know, paranormal sort of almost haunted house style. With The Conjuring, definitely. Insidious, yeah, to an extent it's haunted house, isn't it? Yeah, but I mean, that's the start. I mean, Saw, of course, isn't that at all. That's just, but he started with that, and clearly, and he's really found his footing with these more paranormal ones. And paranormal isn't necessarily my favourite subgenre of horror, but it clearly works for James Wan. And I mean, I think if he, for a modern horror director, you're not really going to get any better. I think ultimately he will be one to go into the record books. Well, not the history books, because of the quality of his films when you compare it to the rest of them out these days. I think if you'd put James Wan's films in with Craven's and Carpenter's, then I'm not sure he'd get the recognition that he does these days. And to be honest, it does show his talent that he can go on to do stuff like Fast 7 and Aquaman and stuff like that. I mean, we haven't seen Aquaman yet, of course, but I have faith in DC movies. I know people tend to not, but we're not talking about DC movies here. So, yeah, another horror director. I've got a list of them here. I think that will, and it's definitely an author, he's definitely got his own crazy style, and that is Eli Roth. Now, Eli Roth doesn't necessarily make the most well-received films, but in terms of, you know, honing in on a style and really knowing what you want to do when making a horror film, these days, you know, I say these days as in the last 10 years, no one's done it quite like Roth, because, I mean, he's only really made 4 or 5 horrors, maybe 4 or 5 films, I'm not sure. I know he had a part in Grindhouse, the Tarantino Robert Rodriguez mashup. I know he directed a segment of that, and that's quite, it's not horror, but it's quite sort of gory. But of course, with Cabin Fever, the Hostel films, even The Green Inferno from the last couple of years, I mean, these were films that aren't necessarily sort of universally regarded as phenomenal pieces of cinema, but they all have that certain style. I mean, The Green Inferno is basically Eli Roth's love letter to Cannibal Holocaust. And, you know, Cannibal Holocaust, these are films that not everybody can watch. But I think Eli Roth deserves his place. Because of that sort of style and the fact that he just knows what he wants to do. You know, these films don't necessarily have to be excellent. I mean, you can even go back to, you know, the classic bunch of the 60s, you know, as though we need to talk about Vincent Price anymore here, but I mean, there's few Vincent Price films that you could say are excellent. They're all good, but it's Price that makes them. Eli Roth's films are lacking. If Eli Roth's films had a star throughout them, like, you know, Hammer and Amicus did in the 60s, then I think they'd be better received. Because I like Cabin Fever. I like the Hostel films. They are almost gore for gore's sake. I didn't particularly like the Green Inferno from the well, it was weird. It had a weird release date. I think it was only released here last year, but I think it was first shown in 2013 or something like that. Eli Roth is, I mean, I can't, whenever I think of Eli Roth, I always just picture that scene in Inglourious Basterds. He seems like such a nice guy, but deep down I think he's got a bit of violence in him, which of course is seen in Inglourious Basterds with his character. But yeah, to make films like this, you need that sort of, you need a bit of sadistic inside you. You need a bit of sadism inside you. But I mean, I can see that he's definitely an auteur. Maybe not in the sense of Hitchcock or something like that. But in his own way, he's definitely an auteur, deserves any recognition he gets, even if his films are incredibly divisive, as they are. Let's talk about some more legends for a bit. We've talked about James Wan and Eli Roth quite quickly there. This will be a slightly shorter episode, obviously, because it is just me hosting. Hopefully that's still entertaining enough for any listeners, because there may not be that conversational nature, but still, it should be fine. I want to talk about James Whale. Now, James Whale is a director from the 30s. Now, this is my classic love coming in again, like it did in episode 1. James Whale is responsible for Frankenstein, Bride of Frankenstein, The Invisible Man, and one other Universal horror film of that time, The Old Dark House. I think he did, yeah, Old Dark House. And they're all great. I mean, you've got to love the style of the 30s Universal monsters, which I just do because I find them fun. But I mean, James Whale for me is up there with, you know, your John Carpenter, Wes Craven, in terms of horror directing legends, because those four, you know, I said consistency, you've got it there. Quality of films, you've got it there. You know, a clear love of the genre, a clear love of what he was doing, and just so effective. Sorry, there's a hair on the mic. Just, yeah, such a love of what he was doing, and that shows in those films. because of the way, just the way they were directed, the way they were set up is just excellent. And I mean, you can stay old but come more recent with, you know, Hammer horror, of course, the classic, the legendary British studio. One of the only things I like about this country is its horror output. But they had sort of they had Terence Fisher. Now, Terence Fisher did a lot for Hammer, directing wise. He really was their go-to guy when it came to directing. You know, he's responsible for all the major ones, the Horror Dracula, Curse of Frankenstein, all the stuff that you will have heard of from Hammer. He's responsible for that. And I mean, similarly with what I was saying before about Vincent Price films and Eli Roth, these, Hammer, they're not necessarily the best films, but they all have that style. And I think, to be honest, I think style is more important to me personally. Now, this is, of course, all just my opinion. If you do have your own opinion, be sure to use the hashtag HorrorHousePod on Twitter to let us know what you think. Of course, this is just my opinion. This is just a ramble of my feelings that hopefully you can listen to, relax to, and perhaps be entertained by. Yeah, what was I talking about? See, I went off on a ramble there and I forgot what I was talking about. Terence Fisher. Yeah, he was responsible for most of Hammer's more well-known stuff of the late 50s, early 60s. And like I said, they weren't necessarily the best films, but it is that style that I think puts Terence Fisher in that group of legends for me, because he had that style, he went with that style. And I mean, yeah, some people can, I mean, look at Wes Craven. He really sort of changed styles a bit. I mean, look at early in his career, you got Last House on the Left, you've got Hills Have Eyes. They're difficult to watch, violent, horrible films. Later on, you've got stuff like New Nightmare and The Scream, which are basically just funny. And they're just sort of making a mockery of the genre, really. Which, that is... And then in the middle of all that, you've got Swamp Thing, which is its own thing. You know, it's sort of weird, I'm slightly contradicting myself here. Because I say keeping to a certain style brings out a horror legend in terms of directing. But then I look at Wes Craven's filmography and I just say there's loads of random styles in here, but it all works. That's what makes Craven a bit different to the rest of them, I think, because he loved the genre, didn't he? He loved the genre. Rest in peace, man. He really did. And he could do anything with it, as shown by that bizarre, spectrum of a filmography. But most of the others who we talk about had their own style. But that's what set Craven apart, the fact that he could take really any style of horror and do it so well. And that's why he will always be missed by any horror lover. So let's go back to talking about a modern guy now, shall we? And let's talk about the ever controversial, the ever divisive Rob Zombie. Because Rob Zombie is a director I've found that people hate. People really don't like him. Now, I really don't like the Halloween remake. I think that isn't good at all. I've seen it once and my reaction was just no. But House of a Thousand Corpses, The Devil's Rejects, really the start of his horror career in directing. Those two, obviously The Devil's Rejects is the sequel. Those two are great. I really do like those two. I think they're a great homage to the violent stuff of the 70s. There's that word that I'm thinking of now. What is it? The violent stuff of the 70s, the experimental, I don't know if any of you listening can figure out what I'm trying to say here. This is a real unedited ramble of just my thoughts, because that is what I want this podcast to be. I want this to be unedited. I want this to be as casual as possible, because I think that makes for a more relaxing, that make for a more entertaining show for any of you listening. I really can't think of that word I was trying to say, but yeah, House of a Thousand Corpses, Devil's Rejects, they harken back to an older time and a better time in horror, and I think that's what makes me personally like them, the incredibly violent, sort of horrible nature of these. It reminds you of stuff like Last House on the Left and Texas Chainsaw Massacre even, which we definitely will be talking about one of these days. But Zombie has definitely he's took a step down since then. You know, his last few outings have not been well received at all. I mean, Lords of Salem wasn't great at all. He has got a new one coming out this year, 31. I have no idea that could turn out. To be honest, I can't see it turning out great, because he just seems to be on this downward spiral. But I mean, he started off great. I said with those two, with House of a Thousand Corpses and Devil's Rejects, he started off his horror directing career with those two, and you're thinking, this guy could go somewhere. Sadly, he hasn't been able to do that, and I think that's put a lot of people off even considering him in the talk of legendary horror directors. But maybe that's a sign of the times these days that maybe Rob Zombie is considered one of the horror directors that we should be talking about. I mean, I'm not saying that he should. Did he do a bit in Grindhouse as well? I think he did, you know. I think both him and Eli Roth did a bit in Grindhouse. Hang on, Yes, he did. Oh, that's interesting. Okay. Maybe Grindhouse is the place for modern horror directors to come out. I don't know. But yeah, anyway, I'm not saying that Rob Zombie should necessarily be considered a horror legend. I don't think he can. But, you know, we talk about having that style, being an auteur, and like I say, obviously this is not an auteur in the classic film school sense of Hitchcock and people like that. This is an auteur in the sense of he has that style, he sticks to that style, he's not going to let anybody change that style. And Rob Zombie definitely does that. There's no denying that he doesn't do that. Do I think he will go down in history? No. But do I like his first two films? Yeah, I do. Okay, we did mention going back to more of the legends. Now, I think we're going to turn this into a bit of a sort of, let's talk about one modern guy, talk about a legend, talk about a modern guy, put a bit of comparison in. I mean, I say comparison, I mean, it's difficult to compare the modern guys to the legends, other than perhaps perhaps Eli Roth to someone like Toby Hooper, who did Texas Chainsaw Massacre, although Texas Chainsaw Massacre is considerably more well received than the original, of course, from '74. He's considerably better received than anything Eli Roth's put out. But I mean, in terms of style, I suppose you can. Yeah, Carpenter can't really be compared to anyone these days. He's his own. John Carpenter is his own. He's on his own special level up with Wes Craven, really. The Untouchables of horror directing are those two. We talked about Vincent Price acting before, like we probably will do every single episode, because let's face it, he's the reason everyone loves horror. So why don't we talk about his major directing partner, Roger Corman? Roger Corman, who is still alive today, actually. He's like 90. Roger Corman did a lot of the better Price vehicles of that same time, the early 60s and whatnot. And like Terence Fisher, who we talked about a bit ago, he had his own style, along with Amicus Production Company. He had his own style that he just stuck to, and it just worked. Sorry about that. It just worked. It just really worked, and it's the reason these Price films work so well. You know, you mix the directing of Corman with the acting of Price, and what you get are these really atmospheric, quite fun, whimsical horror films. And of course, you know, he can be considered a horror legend. Maybe his films work better due to Price, but I can consider, I can get behind considering Roger Corman as a horror directing legend. I mean, he's definitely done enough. I mean, there are some. See, this is another argument that you can put on this. There are plenty of directors that have directed some phenomenal horror films, but I wouldn't consider them horror legends because they maybe only have done one. You say Richard Donner with The Omen. The Omen is probably my favourite religious horror film. But I mean, Richard Donner, you know, he's responsible for Superman. He's responsible for Lethal Weapon. You know, you can't consider someone like that a horror legend just because he made one excellent horror film. Which is a shame, really, because I think Richard Donner is a great director. No denying that. But to be a horror legend, you need to have that. You need to have the big resume. You need to have multiple films. You need to have that consistency in the genre that not a lot of people have these days. Maybe James Wan is the only one who has that true high quality consistency. And I mean, he hasn't necessarily done 10 of them, but he is still young. So, actually, I have on my list here, I have Fede Alvarez. Now, Fede Alvarez did the Evil Dead remake, which was a good, certainly better than the Halloween remake from Zombie. The Evil Dead remake was good. I enjoyed the Evil Dead remake. And he has another film coming out later this year called Don't Breathe, which also stars Jane Levy from the Evil Dead remake. So maybe he's found his go-to cast member there. I mean, this will only be his second horror film, I think. Unless I've missed anything out. I don't think so. But anyway, I mean, Fede Alvarez has every right to maybe go somewhere in the future. You know, we're getting onto more of a conversation about who might go down in the future rather than people that have made stuff in the recent past and that might be considered there now. You know, we're now talking about people that in 15 years might be considered up there. I think I'm looking forward to Don't Breathe. I am. The trailer was pretty good. I think the podcast retweeted that. Let's take a minute actually now. Let's take a minute. Take care of some business. There's a reference to Profiles with Malone and Mance. If anyone is familiar with that wonderful show that needs to get back on the air. If you are enjoying this podcast, if you enjoyed episode 1, maybe you didn't enjoy this one as much because it's just me. Who knows, you might not like me. But if you did, be sure to like, comment, share it with everyone, retweet it on Twitter, subscribe to this YouTube channel for more. This is a brand new YouTube channel. There will be, I'm sure, plenty of stuff on here in the coming months aside from this main show. You can follow the podcast on Twitter at HorrorHouse Pod. You can follow me on Twitter at the Purple Don, or you can go to thepurpledon.com to check out more of my ramblings on there. I went and saw the Nice Guys on Friday, and yeah, I've got my thoughts up on that on there. So yeah, go do that if you want, of course. No one's forcing you to. But yeah, okay, let's get back to this. Fede Alvarez. Yeah, Don't Breathe. I'm looking forward to Don't Breathe. I think it'll be a decent one. Maybe nothing special, but you know, I thought that about The Witch, which of course we mentioned in episode 1 as well. And if you haven't checked out episode 1, I would strongly recommend doing that, because you'll also be able to hear the excellent thoughts of my usual co-host Daisy, who should be back for episode 3. Fede Alvarez might go down as one of the greats. I'm coming out and saying that now. I think if he carries on in the same way that he did with the Evil Dead remake, if Don't Breathe is good and he sticks in the genre for the next 15 years, I think he'll do good things. He could be considered up there in the end. I don't know. I kind of like him. I don't know. I think, well, while we're on the topic of Evil Dead, why don't we talk about Sam Raimi? Sam Raimi, of course, is responsible for everything Evil Dead. But can he be considered a horror legend? You know, he went on to do different things. I mean, he did the Tobey Maguire Spider-Man films, of course, which I like. I like those. Yeah, Spider-Man 3, but let's forget. Sam Raimi, I think, thinking about it now, can be considered a horror legend, even though he hasn't necessarily done a great deal in the genre. He is responsible for that phenomenal universe of Evil Dead that, of course, now has Ash vs. Evil Dead, 30 years later, which is a great show. Maybe that's just me being a bit biased. I don't know. If you think it's me being biased, tell me that. But yeah, I think purely for creating the Evil Dead universe, I think Sam Raimi can go down in the history of the genre, I think. And who knows, maybe Alvarez, after doing that remake, will go on. You know, maybe he'll go on to have a career of Sam Raimi's. Maybe we'll see him directing some superhero films one day. You know, we get enough of them. I don't know. I did want to talk about, before we start thinking about wrapping up this shorter episode, I did want to talk about the creator of the modern zombie, who, as we all know, is George Romero, who in 1968 gave us arguably the best, well, of its time, the best independent horror film. Maybe even the best independent film. I don't know much about independent films that side of 1970, because there was that new wave of directors in the 70s that embraced independence. George Romero was kind of one of the first ones in 1968 with Night of the Living Dead, of course. Night of the Living Dead is just, I mean, I don't think many people I don't think anyone mixes social commentary with genuinely excellent horror better than George Romero in his, of the Dead films. And I know a lot of people say Dawn of the Dead is better than Night of the Living Dead. I prefer Night of the Living Dead. Not really sure why. Maybe it's the fact that it's black and white. Maybe it's the fact that, I don't know. Maybe it's the setting of the farmhouse. I prefer that to the mall. I don't know. Let me know which one you prefer, Dawn or Night. But yeah, George Romero, I mean, he has to go down in legend. He has to. Look how popular zombies are. We get too many zombies these days. Why do you think that is? It's because of George Romero. The Walking Dead is because of George Romero. Indirectly, of course, he didn't create it. And I mean, as much as quite a lot of people love to hate The Walking Dead, you can't deny its popularity. And that's it, all indirectly because of George Romero and his creation of the modern zombie back in 1968. I think Night of the Living Dead was made for something like $60,000, which is incredible, really, considering how people still talk about it today. Evidence here. George Romero is up there with the best of the horror legends. Absolutely. Up there with Craven and Carpenter for me. Definitely. Okay, so as we begin to wrap up this shorter and less intense, more chilled out episode 2, I wanted to mention Guillermo del Toro. Let's make sure we pronounce his name, Guillermo, who, no, isn't a horror director. He's not a horror director. He's a fantasy director. But his work with monsters is what makes me want to talk about him here. No one in the modern day creates monsters like Guillermo. No one. I mean, look at his end. I mean, Hellboy's kind of scary. Hellboy's got its horror elements. I know it's a comic book. But I mean, Hellboy's like, you could pass Hellboy off as a horror film. Easily. you could pass Pan's Labyrinth off as a horror film if it wasn't so sort of. I mean, it's dark anyway. Pan's Labyrinth is a very dark film anyway, but I don't know. It's definitely creepy. Guillermo del Toro's more creepy than all-out horror. I've actually wrote a note here. It says more monsters than all-out horror. Yeah, but yeah, he's definitely, he's definitely got his own style that we talked about before. And, to have that own style, to stick with that own style, definitely makes you, a recognised auteur. Maybe he's not a horror legend because of the nature of his films. They are more fantasy and gothic. Crimson Peak was billed as a horror, although that wasn't really a horror. That was good though. I like that. It was gothic. He likes the gothic, Del Toro, rather than horror elements. Of course, gothic and horror go together almost perfectly. They almost come together as easy as anything. They're almost the same word. But I don't know. Del Toro, no, he's not a horror legend. He's a fantastic fantasy director. He's a fantastic creator of monsters, the best creator of monsters we've had in the modern era. Definitely. But he's not a horror legend, no. Okay. That is about all I wanted to talk about today. Just a few of my thoughts on this topic of will modern horror directors go down in history. Like I said, be sure to let me know what you think about some of these guys using that hashtag HorrorHousePod on Twitter. That'll be checked. I'll check that, or tweet us at HorrorHousePod. Tweet me at the Purple Dom. Like, share, comment, retweet, all that stuff. If you liked this episode, let us know if you prefer these more chilled out one-on-one episodes, or the more sort of intense conversational, maybe slightly fun nature of episode 1. If you've not checked out episode 1, go ahead and do that. You could also let us know what you'd like to hear in episode 3. We haven't settled on a topic yet. So if you have any suggestions at all, again, use that hashtag. And, who knows, maybe we'll do one. Probably will, to be honest. But yeah, I hope you've enjoyed this shorter episode. I hope it's been entertaining enough for you. Maybe you're listening to this to calm yourself down. I don't know. I don't know why you'd do that. Okay. Thanks for listening, guys. I'll see you in episode 3.